Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Louise Jacobs and I'm the chair of UJIA. I'm going to hand over immediately to Emily Pater, the UGIA director in Israel. Thank you, Emily.
Emily Pater, and I am the UJIA director in Israel. Today, I'm in the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is one of the key locations in Israel where thousands of people have been evacuated from all over different kibbutzim and communities, both from the Gaza border and also from other places in Israel. And today in this hotel, I have met with people from Kibbutz Be'eri, one of the kibbutzim that was absolutely devastated by the horrific events on October 7th. And they are living here, they have been living here for the past 5 weeks, and they're going to be living here for many more weeks to come. They don't know when they're going home. And so what they have done is that they tried to create a sense of security, of normalcy, of routine for their kids. And I'm standing in a kindergarten. It's a tent, but it's a tent that's been beautifully decorated, and it's got lovely furniture, and it's got books, and it's got toys, and it's got all the things that the kids need to give them a sense of normal life and normal activity. In the days following the horrific events of October the 7th, it was clear that the country was in trauma and the needs were immense. The question is, though, how do you help small children, young children, process their loss, process their trauma? UJIA is supporting a program called Chibuki to help children address the events that took place on October the 7th. Let me introduce you to Chibuki. This is the Chibuki doll. Now, Chibuki in Hebrew means hug. And this doll, it's actually a pet dog, was developed after previous wars in Israel. And this doll, in fact, belongs to a kid in this hotel whose name is Sapir. And this doll is used to help Sapir and many other kids express what they went through on October the 7th and the many hours that followed. And they're able to do it by caring for the doll, by giving the doll a hug and transferring their feelings to the doll. I just met a mother in this hotel called Michal, who on Simchat Torah morning was in Ofakim with her family, including a 1-month-old baby and a 3-year-old. And they spent hours hiding on a roof with their family members and neighbors, keeping deadly quiet. And when Michal's son was given the Chibuki doll and was asked to say what would make Chibuki happy, he said to go up on the roof and to stay silent. And stayed there for 3 hours until they were eventually rescued. And that 3-year-old is using the Chibuki doll to talk about what happened to him on that Simchat Torah morning and help him process his loss.
Thank you, Emily. UJIA is committed to helping victims of terror through therapy, long-term therapy. This isn't anything that is going away quickly. When you land in Israel, you feel that that is a country that is completely traumatized. We are working with partners that we have worked with for decades. We're working with the Israel Trauma Coalition. We're working with the JDC. We are helping all those communities that were affected on the 5th of October overcome their trauma with therapy, as Emily explained. But we need your help to do that. The Jewish people who were affected need your help to do that. So any help that you can give UJIA, please do so by donating at ujia.org. And we would be very grateful, as would they. I would now like to turn our attention to our guest tonight. Many of you will know Mark Regev. He was an outstanding ambassador from Israel to the UK from 2016 to 2020. He was a wonderful friend of the Jewish community, and I was personally very privileged to work closely with Mark. Mark made Aliyah in 1982, and he joined the Nahal division and then the foreign ministry. He spent time working in many other diaspora communities, including Hong Kong and Beijing, and nobody understands diaspora communities better than Mark. We are very fortunate to have Mark with us this evening and very grateful that he has given up his time to do this for our community. As you know, Mark is currently the senior advisor to the Prime Minister, and we regularly see him on our screens. As Mark doesn't have long to spend with us this evening, I'm going to ask him a few questions, and I'm going to jump straight in, if that's okay, Mark.
That's fine.
What do you say to those countries and those international actors and those people who are now calling for Israel to have a ceasefire?
So first of all, thanks, Louise, for having me, and it's a pleasure to speak with the UJIA. I have many friends in this in this audience, and it's a pleasure to be with you. It's also a pleasure because often I sit in this chair and I have to answer, some hostile interviewer, and it's nice to be with friends. It is appreciated. Look, the problem with people who call for a ceasefire, and I'm sure, no doubt some of them are Hamas supporters or anti-Israel, but others are just good people who think let's stop the fighting, let's have a break, let's stop the bloodshed. But the trouble with that is it's basically say so Hamas stays in power, and if Hamas stays in power, then we're just going to have more violence around the corner. Hamas leaders say so openly. There was the deputy head of Hamas gave an interview to Lebanese TV last week, and he said, given the opportunity, they would do October 7th again and again and again. His words, not mine. And so the idea that Israel would have to live with this terror enclave and just wait for the next attack is, of course, unsustainable. And so people who are calling for a ceasefire, maybe some of them have noble intentions, but what they're actually doing is they're condemning us to Hamas and living with Hamas, and that means being on the receiving end of the sort of atrocious and gruesome violence that we experienced on October 7th. I think you can also make a very strong argument that Hamas's rule of Gaza is not just terrible for Israelis for obvious reasons, but it's also terrible for the people of Gaza. Hamas has ruled Gaza for 16 years, and what have they brought? Suffering, pain, poverty. And you could make, I think, a strong case for saying that everyone, Israelis and Palestinians alike, would be much better off without Hamas. And so all the people who say stop the fighting now are saying Hamas stays in power, then it will replenish its military machine, it will rest, recuperate, and then what is it, 2 months down the line, 3 months down the line, we're all back to square one. And Israelis, I think, to be frank, refuse to live that way. Israelis refuse any longer to have this sort of terrorist state on their border. And the goal is to eliminate Hamas, to destroy its military machine and to end its political control of the Gaza Strip. And the truth is, there's support for that in the United States, in Great Britain. I think people understand that Israel should not have to return to the reality of October 7th at 6 a.m. and just be waiting for the next attack. It's unsustainable.
Yeah. And just leading on from that, you've got a minister, I think it was Eli Cohen, who said that he believed that Israel had less than 2 weeks before the international community's view of the conflict shifts. Do you agree with that? And if so, will Israel have to adapt its operations in any way?
So that's some of the messages we're receiving from abroad. But the truth is, we have to work hard to get more time, because we will need more time. And I think part of getting more time from the international community is to do our job correctly. And that means we have to relentlessly pursue Hamas. They are a vicious enemy, and we have to fight at them, and we have to destroy Hamas. At the same time, in parallel, we have to make a maximum effort to help the civilians of Gaza, to safeguard them, to keep them out of the crossfire. And that's easier to say than it is to do, because combat is always something very difficult, and there's the fog of war. And there's been no war in history that I know of where civilians haven't been caught up in the crossfire. But I think if we can show the international community that we're attacking Hamas and doing everything we can to keep Gaza's civilians out of the harm's way, I think that will give us time to finish the job, and that's our game. First of all, it's the moral thing to do. Yeah, we don't want to see Gaza's children die. It's the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do, because it gives us, I think, the time we need to finish the operation.
And do you think that that message is coming across? I mean, I heard today that the IDF were moving incubators into the hospital, into Shifa Hospital. And for the first time, it feels to me, or first time, that message in most broadcast media, not all of them, in most media, is starting to come across.
I hope so. I mean, once again, I hope so. I think people understand who Hamas is, right? More than ever before. And I've been sitting with my prime minister in meetings with world leaders who've come here. And I think it was the German Chancellor, excuse me, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, who said, that Hamas is the new Nazis. And Biden said they're worse than ISIS. So I think there is an international consensus, also, believe it or not, in the Arab world too, that Hamas has to go. And I think if we play our cards right, and there's an awareness of this in Israel, we will have the time we need to get the job done. And the job done is a new reality in Gaza, where Hamas no longer runs the Gaza Strip, and where Israel doesn't have this constant terror threat. I mean, if we want to rebuild the communities of the South, all those communities along the southern frontier, and we want people to go back there and raise their families and plant trees and rebuild, they have to be feeling that is a very secure place to live. And there's no way to do that as long as Hamas is in power. Let's be frank. People will refuse to move back there. So getting rid of Hamas is crucial for the future of Israel, because once again, we have to rebuild the South, and no one will live there, right? Who will live there if they have to live in constant fear of terrorists coming across the frontier in the middle of the night and killing their children? Yes, we have to achieve security. That's essential for Israel.
I mean, when I met people who had been affected on the 7th of October, they want to move back. And as you rightly say, they want to move back to their communities, but they feel that there's a long way to go before they can let that happen. And they're going to be living in these current conditions for quite some time. So you're right. I mean, there's a job to be done beforehand. Can I just ask you about the hostages? Something that is in the forefront of many people's minds. There have been rumours over the last couple of days that there may be a release of some hostages under certain conditions. Are you able to describe any of the efforts that are currently underway to advocate for the release of these hostages, or even whether the International Red Cross has been in to visit them, or whether there isn't any chance of them going in to visit them, which is something that is very much on the minds of, I know, this community? I'm not sure if there's anything you're able to say. And indeed, are the hostages still a very high priority for the government?
So, of course, they're a high priority for the government. And of course, we've been talking to the Red Cross. The Prime Minister spoke last week with the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And he talked about the importance of visiting the hostages. And they've asked Hamas to visit the hostages, and Hamas has refused, and that's where it stands. Hamas has not allowed Red Cross visits, not in the past and not today. I mean, Gilad Shalit was held by Hamas for years, and they never allowed a single Red Cross visit, and they're not allowing it today. It doesn't mean we don't have to keep the pressure up, and I would hope that you would be speaking to the British government, and people around the world would be speaking to their governments. And I think there has to be a pressure on the Red Cross, and for the Red Cross to put pressure on Hamas. It should not be accepted for 1 second this is the new normal, that the people in the position of these hostages, that they shouldn't be getting Red Cross visits. Of course, they should all be released immediately and unconditionally, yes. But if that's not going to happen tomorrow, at the very least, there should be Red Cross visits. And Hamas, I think, by not allowing the visits, has shown itself for what it really is, yes, a brutal, horrific terrorist organization. And thankfully, in my part of the job at least, some of the media now not running away from that word the way they used to in the past. They are terrorists. They are brutal people. They are guilty of the most horrendous crimes against humanity in the way they behaved on October 7th. I don't have to tell this audience what they did. They were very gruesome, right? I've sat in meetings with foreign leaders where we've shown parts of the video footage of what was done by Hamas, and every time I see the videos, it's horrific. And you know what? It's really interesting. I think, as someone who's a quasi-historian, is we've had in human history, we've had terrible people. There were the Nazis, and there were Stalin in Russia. Yes, people who committed the most atrocious, horrendous crimes against humanity. But they always, as a rule, tried to hide their crimes. As the Allies were coming in to destroy Nazi Germany, there was actually an attempt, to destroy the evidence of the Holocaust. Yes, the Nazis didn't want the world to see what they'd done. And yet what we saw on October 7th, most of the damning evidence is taken by Hamas. They filmed their crimes, and not only did they film their crimes, they put them up on social media. They were proud, they advertised their crimes. And you see in the movies, you see the glee in which they're killing and they're burning and they're raping and they're beheading, their happiness, so to speak, in doing all these terrible things. And it's a new level of depravity. As I said, Chancellor Scholz, when he was here, called them the new Nazis. And so they have to be defeated. And I have no illusions that they're going to allow Red Cross visits, though we must keep the pressure up. Once again, we can't accept this as the new normal. As getting the hostages out, there's 239 hostages, of them 32 children, including a 9-10-month-year-old baby. He was 9 months old when he was taken hostage. He's already 10 months now. There's also a group of elderly people over the age of 75, over the age of 80, Holocaust survivors and so forth. They really are a despicable group of people, Hamas. We believe in Israel, the government, that the way to get the hostages out is not to have any illusions about Hamas. They are not going to suddenly release the hostages because they've become humanitarians. Yes, that's not an option. But by keeping the pressure up on Hamas, the military pressure, and every day that pressure increases, they are feeling the pain, they're feeling the IDF, they're feeling the pressure, and I think that's the best way to deliver a release of our hospital. And I can't tell you I know it's going to happen, but if we do have in the next few days a hostage release, it'll be only because of the pressure that they're under, the IDF pressure. They can feel us coming for them, and that could, we hope and we believe, expedite a release of the hostages.
Which would be wonderful. So let's all pray for that. Just to change tack slightly, we have seen over the recent days an increasing action on the northern border from Hezbollah. I know it's really difficult to predict, but what is your thinking whether they get more involved and therefore the conflict escalating? And that, coupled with that, we are also seeing an increase in violence on the West Bank. And I just worry, and we all just worry, how Israel would or may have to cope with a war on all three fronts.
So first of all, if I recall correctly, and you'll correct me, Louise, that the UJIA actually has communities across the north that you're supporting, correct?
We do, many of which have now been evacuated into the centre of the country. Yeah, we do.
That's because I know communities close to the border have been, people have left, which is good, because otherwise more people would have been killed probably.
Absolutely.
At the moment, the violence, we've lost people, but the violence has been in the border areas. And Hezbollah has been very careful so far not to declare all-out war. They want to try to contain the violence in the border area, and we've been responding in kind. Now, Israel is not interested in an escalation in the north. We've got this war in the south that we want to be able to focus on. And we'd prefer to keep things relatively quiet in the north. But the big question is, what does Hezbollah want and what does Iran want? And are they interested also in containing things in the north? And it's not clear. And we are following matters very closely. We've mobilized in the north. Our army is ready. And if Hezbollah makes a mistake and they attack us in a way that forces a powerful response, the only thing I can say to Hezbollah is that unlike in October 7th, when Hamas took us by surprise and we paid in blood for not being ready. Yes, 1,200 Israelis lost their lives and another 240 are being held captive because Hamas took us by surprise on October 7th. In the north, we're not going to be taken by surprise. We are ready. As I said, we're mobilized. Our army is in place. And if Hezbollah does escalate the situation, they have to know that the IDF is ready and will respond decisively, and that Lebanon will have to, unfortunately, a country that has suffered so much over the last few years, will be engulfed in a war that Israel will win, and Hezbollah will be defeated, and the cost will be borne by Lebanon. We don't want that war. We're ready for it. We hope we don't have to go there, but if we do, we will win decisively. And as an amateur historian, again, I'd say to you that Israel has fought three front wars in the past, in 1967, in 1973. In both, we prevailed, we won decisively, and if we're forced to fight a 2 or a 3 front war, we will win again. Once again, we prefer not to fight it, but if they force it upon us, I have no doubt that we will prevail. On the West Bank too, violence has been increased, but still containable. There are Hamas cells across the West Bank, and we have been proactively acting to take out Hamas people, to arrest them in the middle of the night, to interrupt and disrupt their infrastructure there. We're trying to contain it there on the West Bank for the same reasons. And so far, the level of violence on the West Bank has been relatively low. And I believe it's possible to keep it that way. But you're right, Louise, we have to keep our eye on the ball. Yes, we can't be surprised. And I mean, communities across Israel, not just over the West Bank, they're afraid, concerned about copycat killers. If we saw those, pickup trucks with Hamas terrorists in them coming into communities in Israel and just, machine gunning everyone they saw. So we have to be ready for such things, happening on other fronts. And we have to be prepared. I live in Modi'in, which maybe some of the people in this conversation have visited because there's not quite a large Anglo population. Quite a few British Jews have made their homes in Modi'in, including a former president of the Board of Deputies. And we have now, when I drive home at night, and often I arrive late because I'm here with the Prime Minister until well in the early hours of the morning often. I drive home at night, we've got this neighborhood watch we didn't used to have, and people are checking cars as they come into our community. And I think we are not abnormal. I think communities across Israel have to beef up their security because of concerns of terrorist attacks. And I see, I get because I'm busy here at the Defense Ministry every day, I don't have to do it, but my wife, Vered, she does her part as well. She's up in the middle of the night doing her 3-hour shifts, along with other citizens who are doing their part to make sure their communities are safe.
I mean, when you visit, it does feel like this is a country where everyone is making an effort to feel part of helping Israel at this particular time. I mean, this does feel like it's a whole population that is pulling together. And one of the things I definitely saw was civil society rising to the challenges in a way that I thought was quite remarkable. Just changing tact. We rarely get to speak to someone like yourself who understands our community as well as you do, having spent time here. Is there any advice you would give us in light of the rising anti-Semitism that we're seeing across Europe and specifically in the UK?
That's probably above my pay grade, yes. Advice on dealing with anti-Semitism, other than to say you have to call it out, yes, and to expose it and condemn it, yes. I mean, I was in London, as you said, from 2016 and 2020, and that was a period where anti-Semitism was all over the newspapers. I remember people at the time saying, who would have thought Britain in the second decade of the 20th century, people would be talking about anti-Semitism. You know, anti-Semitism was supposed to be in places like Poland and Russia, and it was supposed to be part of our past and not part of our present, yes? And unfortunately, that's not the case. And Jewish communities across the world have seen an upsurge in anti-Semitism. But maybe we shouldn't be surprised. Hamas, I mean, people talk about Hamas being brutal terrorists, and they are, yes, of course they are. But they're also fundamentally anti-Semitic. And the people who sort of identify with Hamas are most likely anti-Semitic too. I mean, you only have to read the Hamas Charter, and anyone who wants some nice bedtime reading can find an English translation. I think it's from 1987, and the Hamas Charter talks about, you know, Jewish world conspiracies. It talks about Jews perverting morals. It talks about Jews behind the First World War and the Second World War, yes? It has all the traditional anti-Semitic tropes and stereotypes and conspiracy theories that we know from fascist literature in the mid-20th century, yes? And it's all there in the Hamas founding document. And what's the problem with the founding document of Hamas is they actually believe it, yes? For them, it's a plan of action. We saw that on October 7th, right? They believe every Jew should be killed. And they take it very seriously. And we saw in the videos, their own videos, yes, the glee, the happiness they have when they killed our people. And and so I don't think it's a coincidence that you've seen this rise of anti-Semitism together with Hamas.
Yeah, no, and as you say, it's not stopping on the shores of Israel. Diaspora communities, the UK community, want to feel like they're doing their bit. Is there anything when you look around and you speak all the time to foreign media and to diaspora communities, is there anything in particular that you think we could be doing or should be doing to help that we're not doing? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Well, I think all the things that I could suggest, you're probably doing already. I know you're raising money to support communities that have gone through terrible crises and trauma and families. I know you, excuse me. I know that you're lobbying the British government to adopt Israel's positions, to show sympathy for Israel, to show support for Israel. I know that you're coming here on solidarity missions. The only thing that maybe you're not doing that you could think of doing is there's a shortage of working hands on a lot of farming communities, both in the north and the south. And if people decided they wanted to volunteer here and come and pick fruit, it would be greatly appreciated. I know after the 1967 war and before the 67 war, because there was all the able-bodied men were called up for the military then in what was it, in the month before, in May 67. And I remember the time that many hundreds of British Jews came to work on kibbutzim to help out with the shortage of workers. And so anyone who's got free time, who wants to come in Israel and help, I'm sure it will be greatly appreciated. There are, I know in communities in the center of the country, people have been taking one day a week to go down the south to help people pick their fruit and so forth, because a lot of farmers in these communities, you know, they've got fruit or other agricultural products, you know, ready to be picked, and a lot of the farm workers left when the crisis came, and anyone who would want to help with that is greatly appreciated.
There we go. That is a call a specific request. Thank you. We at UJIA are talking to alumni of Birthright and other programs that we work with who have requested to come back. And we're working on a program to send some young people out there to do exactly that in December. I know you're short of time. I just want to ask you, looking slightly further forward, how do you think about Israel? Understandably, it's still a country still traumatized, can start to perhaps think about rebuilding. And what do you think that could look like? And any thoughts about some of what the longer term challenges could be? Understanding that we're still in the middle of the war, you're still in the middle of war, and that may seem like a long way away. But we are asked by our supporters and by other communities what and how diaspora communities could start to think about rebuilding of Israel society.
So when this is over, there'll be a lot to rebuild. Yes, we've got those communities across the south that have gone through, terrible violence and destruction. And it'll be important for the government and philanthropy and organizations like yourself to I think, be a part of the rebuilding. It's important that we build things that they were better than ever before, yes? And when we rebuild kibbutzim and moshavim and cities in the south, the people there can flourish. And that's crucial. And I think if you can be part of that effort, that's very, very important. I think there's also a wider lesson here that I think needs to be said. Over the last couple of months, Israel has been very polarized politically. And, we've had demonstrations, and we've had a very, very vocal and passionate political debate in this country. And people have been, as I say, very polarized. And I think in many ways, what happened to us on October 7th was a wake-up call as Israelis, as Jews, because Hamas, when they came into communities, they didn't ask Israelis, how they voted or what is their attitude to judicial reform, or are they left, are they right, are they doves, are they hawks, are they religious, are they secular? They killed, they murdered, they raped, they butchered people. Yes, and they did it on left-wing kibbutzim and on right-wing cities, right? They don't care. They don't care about all these huge debates we have in our country. And I think though we'll continue to have those debates, and though we'll be a democracy and we'll continue to argue about everything passionately, yes, but I think maybe October 7th reminded us of a common destiny, of a sense of community and a sense of being together. And I can tell you now, Louise, that this country is united. This country is showing a sense of unity that maybe we thought we'd lost. And we see that in everyday things, in the people who are cooking food for soldiers, and the people who are washing the clothes of soldiers, and the people from across the country who volunteered for reserve duty, and this outpouring of community spirit, of national spirit, in response to the terrible violence. And though what happened on October 7th is terrible and traumatic, and was a very, very difficult blow, and the fact that still today we've got 239 people held hostage by these terrible, brutal terrorists, yes, maybe these tragedies have shown Israel at its best. Once again, a sense of unity, a sense of purpose, a sense of common destiny, which I think sometimes it's a pity that we needed a tragedy like we had on October 7th to remind us of all that.
Indeed it is. I'm going to let you go, but I just want to ask you, you know me well enough, is there anything I haven't asked that you think I should have done, that you would like this community to hear?
Just that we'll win. We'll defeat Hamas. We have no choice, we have to win. And that Israel will come out of this. We've gone through difficult times in the past, from Israel's War of Independence to the Yom Kippur War in 1973. Israel's gone through very difficult times in the past. And we've always come out on top, and we've always come out and flourished and succeeded and created what is ultimately an amazing success story, which is the Jewish state. And I'm sure that we'll do so now as well.
Thank you very much for giving up your time this evening, especially knowing how busy you are. I just want to wish you, Vered, and the family be safe, be well, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you for everything that UJIA does.
Our pleasure. I wish we had met under better times.
All right. Bye-bye then.
Thank you. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I think that was incredibly generous of Mark to give us so much of his time. He is now going off to talk to Sky. So I'm sorry we finished a bit earlier than expected, but I hope you found that useful. It is another one in UJIA's events that we're holding at the moment. So please look out for some more of them, which we'll be having over the coming weeks. Thank you very much.